Broadcasting from the Cass Corridor in Detroit, it's the Metro on WDET, Detroit's NPR station. I'm Tia Graham.
And I'm Robin Vincent. Today on the program, Amer Zahr is a Palestinian-American lawyer, comedian, and activist. Because the Biden-Harris administration has continued to back the Israeli war against Palestinians, he's pushed people not to vote for Kamala Harris.
Now, with President-elect Trump headed to the White House, we'll get Amer's thoughts on the political path forward for Arab Americans.
And as much as the holidays are a joyous season, they also present really hard times for a lot of people.
Today, we explore how Black men in particular are struggling with their mental health and what resources are available. But first, the question on a lot of people's minds right now. Why did Donald Trump win the election decisively? Why did he pick up votes in places many thought unlikely? Trump won people making under $50,000, but he also won an array of people, Latino and Hispanic voters nationwide. He even won over young people and more voters in big cities. In southeastern Michigan, Trump won Macomb County, but he also flipped a number of downriver cities and the city of Dearborn. And while Oakland County voted for Harris, fewer people came out for her than for Joe Biden 4 years ago. Trump's second presidential victory has a lot of people questioning how much the Democratic and Republican parties are changing, especially as more working-class voters pull for Trump almost regardless of their racial or ethnic background. To discuss this now, we have Dennis Darnoi here. He is the founder of Dennis Darnoi Consulting, a political consulting firm that tracks voter data in Michigan. Dennis, welcome back to the Metro.
Thanks for having me back. I appreciate it.
Of course. So, broadly speaking, why did voters in Southeast Michigan pull for Trump?
Quite simply, it was the economy and economic concerns and economic anxiety that people felt throughout this area. What we saw was, Trump overperforming his numbers in 2020, and as you already mentioned, Harris not receiving the same amount of votes in, that Joe Biden did in 2020. I mean, for example, Biden won Wayne County 68-30. Harris only won that 62-34. In Oakland County, Biden won that 56-42, and Harris won that 54-44. And in Macomb, that's where you saw a huge change of fortunes for Donald Trump, where he had won it by 8 points in 2020. He won it by 14 points in 2024. So when you see those types of changes, and that happened across the state, where Donald Trump picked up support in areas, and as you said, it's across age groups, it's across genders, it's across educational backgrounds. He was able just to outperform his 2020 numbers, and I think part of the thing that we saw all along with the polls was it did indicate that it was a close race. And so at no point in time did anyone think there was a candidate running away with it. And when you look at the ultimate end, I mean, Donald Trump, won it with less than two points. So it's not as if it was, this 5-point win where everyone was thinking Harris was going to win by 3 or 4. So it was a close race as everyone thought. And ultimately it came down to turnout and who decided to vote and who decided to stay home.
And then as, Trump's policies, they did include tariffs, which would raise prices. Why didn't that hurt him if people were going out to vote because of the economy?
Because the question people are being asked and they were answering in the affirmative for Trump is, are you better off today than you were 4 years ago? And Michigan families are financially stressed. Mm-hmm. There's a survey in June showing that Michigan families were the most financially distressed families in the nation, with Texas being second to it. So there's this sort of thought that if we put Donald Trump back into office, that there's this dream of returning to a pre-COVID economy that Trump put in place. And so, even though the economists have come out and said that part of Trump's economic plan is going to increase the deficit more than what Vice President Harris was proposing, people just vote their pocketbook. And when it costs more to go to the store, when it costs more for a cup of coffee, when it costs more to go out and get dinner, when it costs more for supplies for your kids, people are going to say, no, I don't want this. And Donald Trump represented a change agent where Vice President Harris was seen as a continuation of the Biden presidency.
The Biden presidency. So in your opinion, how much were people actually excited about Trump? What about the excitement surrounding him? And how much were they simply upset with the Democrats based on the raising prices and costs and variety of other things?
Well, what's interesting when you look at the numbers is that Donald Trump outperformed other Republican candidates. So the people who came out and voted for Donald Trump, they didn't vote Republican per se. They voted for Donald Trump. And so when you look at, why Mike Rogers wasn't successful, why some of the other candidates weren't as successful as Donald Trump is because there's this massive fall off from people who voted for Donald Trump and then either did not participate in the Senate races and congressional races or just didn't pull tickets for the Republicans. Yeah. So I think that there was a lot of enthusiasm for Donald Trump. And again, when Kamala Harris said that she wouldn't do anything different than the Biden administration, I think from an economic standpoint, a lot of people said, all right, let's go back to Donald Trump, despite maybe some of the reservations that they have about him as a person.
Yes, you're listening to The Metro on WDET. I'm Tia Graham alongside Robin Vincent, and we're speaking with Dennis Darnoi, founder of Dennis Darnoi Consulting, a political consulting firm that tracks voter data in Michigan. We're talking about the election results and why Donald Trump made such inroads in Wayne and Macomb County. So Trump picked up a lot of people in Wayne County. You talked a little bit about Macomb County, but Wayne County truly picked up a lot of people, certainly a lot of Arab voters in Dearborn, possibly upset with Biden and for how he's handling the war in Gaza. Why do you think Michigan voters chose the Democrats in other spaces? You talked a little bit about the Alyssa Slotkin, Mike Rogers, what do we see there?
Well, I think a lot of it was, again, specific to the Trump-Harris race because, again, yes, Trump won Dearborn by 6 percentage points. And what you saw was the third-party candidate, Jill Stein, getting the largest percentage of her votes coming out of Dearborn. There was no other community that was inspired by a Jill Stein candidacy. So she, in that community, represented a protest vote. They couldn't vote for Donald Trump. They definitely couldn't vote for Kamala Harris. So they chose to go to the third party. And again, I think the other thing that you saw is the youth vote, as we touched on that one. One of the things that struck me as really being interesting is there were some U of M precincts that their vote shifted 20% in Trump's favor from 2020 to 2024. When you look at the city of Detroit, he picked up 20,000 more votes than he did before. He won 8%. So again, when we talk about this, it's not that he won. It's just that he reduced his margin of defeat. And so he went from 5% to 8%. And when you talk about turnout being down in Detroit, his margin of victory defeat coming out of the city of Detroit was a lot less than it was in 2020. And he was able to make that up in the other areas of the state.
Dennis Darnoi, this is Robin jumping into the conversation for a minute here. I think this is really a salient point here about Jill Stein capturing 18% of votes in Dearborn. And you are saying that there is nowhere else in the state where we saw that kind of percentage of voters selecting Jill Stein. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, so I think she ended up, she was the highest of all the third-party candidates statewide, but I believe it was about 2% of the vote that she received, or 1 point something or another. So the communities didn't go out and vote for her other than what we saw here in Dearborn. The same thing with RFK. People thought that maybe third-party candidates were going to have an impact on the election like they did in 2016, and they just simply didn't. They got the same numbers as they did in 2020, which was, again, 1%, 2% of the overall vote. So, the community here in Dearborn, I mean, again, they had expressed this. This is nothing new. Yeah. You had the uncommitted vote against Joe Biden when he was, ran the primary here. And so when you also now combine that with some of the younger voters, they didn't feel as if the Biden administration or the Harris campaign was truly addressing their concerns as it pertained to Israel and Hamas. And so they decided, okay, then we're going to express our displeasure, and again, then go back and look how well Slotkin did in Dearborn and in Wayne County. So again, it wasn't specific to the Democratic Party, but it was very specific to that race.
Wow. I love that explanation. Thank you so much, Dennis. And thank you, Robin, as well. We're going to have a conversation continuing this one a little bit later on in the show with Robin. Right. But, Dennis is going back to the election results and breaking them down. How much of a shift do you think is happening in the parties right now? It's true, that people who didn't care much about politics and people with less education voted Democrat, and it seems they are now voting Republican. So how stable do we see this trend? How, what's going on there?
So I think there's two things to think about. I mean, one that is correct. So when you look at the percentage of people who voted that don't have a college degree, that was 62% of all voters. They broke 45 for Harris, 54 for Trump. When you look at those who voted that do have a college degree or more, that's 38% of the electorate. And they went 57% for Harris, 42% for Trump. What's interesting is I don't know. I mean, it's certainly there's an educational divide there, and I think it's maybe more salient than the gender divide, because when you look at white women with no college degree, they account for 26% of the overall vote. They voted much more closely than white men with no college degree. So women overall made up 56% of the voting population, and they broke for Harris 54-45. But when you look at non-college educated white voters, women and men, they overwhelmingly broke for Trump. So I think, as we look at, okay, as the elections move forward, are we talking more about a gender divide, or are we talking more about an educational divide? And so again, now I would say this though. I mean, remember in 2016, Trump was able to come in and he won. He won with less of a margin, but that didn't translate to the races in 2018. And so a lot of these areas who went for Trump in 16 flipped back to Democrats in 18. They voted for Trump in 20, but then they flipped back again to Democrats in 2022. So, while he did win the state, and as we mentioned, there were a lot more votes for Trump than there were for Republican candidates, it could be something that and we saw this with President Obama as well, that there were people who were supportive of the man and less so of the party.
Which, my brain is going in so many different directions, because I'm thinking about, once again, seeing an overwhelming boost for Trump in certain areas, Macomb County, Wayne County, downriver, of course, in some cities as well. But like you said, the overwhelming voting for other positions within the Senate and other things like that, and they're voting Democrat for that. So it's clear, based on the data, I'm asking this question of course, but is it clear that people were voting for their rights, but then they decided, I just don't think that the president that we're going to be looking at, which would have been Harris, is going to be able to uphold some of those other things that I'm looking towards? Because once again, right now, it's still, I think a lot of us in the newsroom have been talking constantly about that data point, just seeing that other races went Democrat, but then the presidential one just decisively went Trump and in the Republican Party. So it's just very interesting to break that down. It is.
And originally, I was trying to figure out, were there people who voted for Donald Trump and then voted, crossed party lines and voted for Alyssa Slotkin? And really what we found was more the fact that there was fewer people actually voting in the Senate race. So they came out, they voted for Donald Trump, and then, right now we're trying to figure out, did they vote at all after that? Or, then did the normal electorate sort of take over? The other thing that we found is that late voters, they broke for Trump because their number one issue was the economy and how they were doing and how their family finances were and what the quality of life was. When you look at the Senate race, the exit polls show just a little bit of a different story in terms of the issues. Again, economy was still the number one issue, but issues, like healthcare, like abortion, like defending democracy, those had a little bit more of a important role when people were making decisions when it came to those races.
Wow. So what do you make of incumbents being unpopular after the COVID pandemic around the world? Do you think there was very little that Democrats could do to change the outcome of this election?
Well, I'm not so sure about that. I mean, obviously, incumbents around the world, took a hit because of, how our lives have changed post-COVID, and especially our financial lives and how everything is just so much more expensive. What you hear from young voters, so again, remember this, young voters overwhelmingly go for Democrats. When Biden won, he won with 61%. Obama carried them in 2008 and 12 with over 60%. The formula is if Democrats can take 60% of the youth vote, they're going to win the presidency. Kamala Harris took, I believe, 51 or 52%. In Michigan, she took 49.
Wow.
Donald Trump and Kamala Harris were split between the 18 to 29-year-old, demographic. And what you hear is that their economic concerns, their economic anxiety were met with policy platforms, very, nebulous tax credits, and it didn't address the issues that kept them up at night. So again, when you look at the college areas, whether it's MSU or whether it's U of M, even Western Michigan, what you see is, again, when we saw lines there, you thought naturally, okay, that's good for the Democrats. And what it turned out is younger voters were I think I can get further ahead economically, whether it's buying a house, whatever it is, under Donald Trump. And so, I think, again, that may be a unique issue, but at the end of the day, the majority of voters just looked at their pocketbook and said, we believe a continuation of the past 4 years isn't good enough. It's not sufficient. Let's go in a different direction. And Donald Trump was that different direction.
Yes. And my last question to you before we let you go, Dennis, is after looking particularly at Macomb and Wayne and County and Downriver communities, what do you think is the best policy message for Michigan voters right now? I know that voters aren't policy experts, of course, but how much would they gravitate towards a message that includes a higher minimum wage or universal health care and universal child care? So in other words, are people responsive to the kitchen table issues, as many suggest, or would this simply be framed as government handout?
Yeah, I mean, there's a delicious ambiguity to life. You just don't know what's going to happen the next day. And I think when it comes to those issues, it really right now is, what do you discuss at the kitchen table?
Mm-hmm.
And I do believe that right now there would be, especially now that Republicans have control of the state house, that divided government, I think you have different ideologies. And I think anything right now involving government largesse is going to be portrayed as handouts. And again, remember, Trump was successful in talking about dismantling things, about reducing the size of government, of reducing bureaucracy, of reining in costs. And so, again, if it's not something you're talking about at the dinner table with your family, it's not really going to resonate with voters. They want to hear, what are you going to do for me today to make life more affordable?
Dennis Darnoi is the founder of Dennis Darnoi Consulting, a political consulting firm that tracks voter data in Michigan. Dennis, as always, thank you so much for coming to the Metro and breaking things down for us, giving us the layman's terms.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Of course.
Coming up, activist, attorney, and comedian Amer Zahr had a lot of sway in Dearborn and beyond. The Palestinian-American told Arabs not to vote for Vice President Kamala Harris before the election, and many didn't. We'll talk with him next about what that means for Arab Americans now and how they should be looking to exert their political power under a Trump presidency. Stay with us.
Welcome back to the Metro on 1019 WDET FM. I'm Tia Graham.
And I'm Robin Vincent. Let's continue our election analysis by zooming in on one city that speaks to the power of the Arab American vote, Dearborn. The election results there tell us Arab American voters are dissatisfied with the Democratic Party. We know they're angry that the Biden-Harris administration has sent Israel a record of at least $17.9 billion in military aid that's funding the Israeli war in Gaza and now Lebanon. And this despite calls from the United Nations and people worldwide for a ceasefire. As a result, President-elect Donald Trump won 42% of voters in Dearborn. And notably, Jill Stein captured 18% of the vote, more than any other place in Michigan, and that's according to the political analyst we just heard from, Dennis Darnoi. But back to Trump. Is he any better for Palestinians' right to safety and sovereignty? And will he govern with Arab American interests in mind? Amer Zahr has been pushing for Arab Americans to use their power at the ballot box. The Palestinian-American comedian, attorney, and activist has said he doesn't like Harris or Trump. But, he said, one has clearly proven to be deadly. Amer, thanks for joining the Metro.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
So, all right, we have to start with the results of the presidential election. Trump has already spoken with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu at least 3 times since he was elected last week. And he just appointed Mike Huckabee as the U.S. ambassador to Israel. And Huckabee has argued against an Israeli ceasefire. And he's called Israel's illegal settlements in the West Bank that have forcibly displaced Palestinians, quote unquote, communities. Now, we know in his previous term as president, Trump strongly favored Israel. He recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, moved the American embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. He also ended U.S. funding to the UN agency that helps Palestinian refugees. So this is a long list, Amer. As a Palestinian-American, I wonder, I want to go back to your thought that I mentioned previously. Will Trump be deadly?
Well, I mean, he's appointing all the crazies, that's for sure. And we basically asked ourselves the question over the last year, how can it be more deadly than what we've already seen, and what we've already experienced? And it was clear to us from our experience under a Trump presidency that the Democratic Party treated us better when he was in power than when they were in power. This is not about us believing Trump, okay? I mean, sure, you have some people in our community who got on stages with Trump and believed him, and I think that's a little politically naive, and I understand why they did it. They wanted to beat Harris. I get it. But anyone who voted for Trump based on his policies, I don't think that's what the most of Arab Americans were doing. They wanted to beat Harris. And very clearly because of the policy. And what we saw, again, is that a liberal, pro-Israel, pro-Zionist presidency seems to protect Israel much more from critique in America than a Trump presidency. I think we're going to see the Democratic Party maybe turn into the party that actually finally criticizes Israel openly. We saw that before. They did it under Trump.
Okay, talk more about that. That's really interesting. So you feel that the Democrats treat Arab Americans better during Trump's first term?
I remember huge amounts of people going down to the airport and protesting on our behalf in the first week of Trump's term.
When Trump enacted his Muslim ban.
I remember that when Trump said he's going to move the embassy to Jerusalem, every Democrat, even Nancy Pelosi, who had voted to send the embassy to Jerusalem every year for 30 years, even she signed a letter saying it's a bad idea. And then Biden said he's going to keep it there, and everybody applauded. So we've lived through this, okay? We've lived through this before. And then when Biden became president and basically substantially, although not in style, but in substance, kept all the same policies of Trump when it came to Palestine, the Democrats told us to, be quiet, get in line. And then we had the Sheikh Jarrah stuff in 2021 when people were getting ethnically cleansed from Jerusalem and Biden fully supported Israel. And then, of course, when they started their genocide 13 months ago and he fully supported them. And not only fully supported them, came out 3 days after October 7th and said he saw beheaded babies when he didn't. And that severely dehumanized our community, which we've been going through for decades and centuries in this country anyway. And who would the American public believe more when they say they saw beheaded babies? Joe Biden, the grandfather, or Donald Trump? The media would have immediately questioned Donald Trump. But Joe Biden said everybody believed it. And 1 week later, a 6-year-old boy in Chicago was stabbed 26 times by his landlord, who said that all Palestinians should die. So this is the world that we live in. This is the world the Democrats created for us. So the Democrats did this. We didn't do it.
Okay, Amer,
I'm a little angry, in case you...
understandably so. I mean, you have just listed off some terrible, terrible tragedies that have happened, and we should, of course, acknowledge that and take a moment to acknowledge the climate right now in our country. And it is a hostile climate toward Arab Americans and Muslim Americans, certainly, and also toward Jewish Americans as well. Now, the Democrats, though, are likely to have quite a bit less power in terms of, we know that they've lost. They're losing their power in Congress, that Republicans have taken over the Senate and are likely to take over the House. So how could that to me feels like some diminished power in terms of what they can actually do to exert that power that you're talking about in holding Trump accountable?
Well, first of all, it's probably likely in 2 years they'll get the House back. That just happens with every presidency anyway.
Sure.
But that's not really what it was about. What it was about was, we understand, most people in our community understand that in the two-party system, which is not a great system, but in this two-party system, that Arab Americans and Muslim Americans' place is probably much more with the Democrats than it is with the Republicans. We understand that. But were we interested in continuing to feed this like functioning addict that was the Democratic Party? Or do you have to say to them, you know what, we're cutting you off and maybe you got to go to rehab? You know, that was the decision we were placed with. It's not a decision that we enjoyed or liked, but it was clear what we had to do. We could not let the Democratic Party think that this recipe was the recipe to victory. We had to let them know that this recipe was a recipe to lose. And by the way, we didn't just start telling them this in October 2024. We started telling them this on October 2023. We said, you got to stop this now. And they could have. See, the problem is we're not dumb. We're smart. And in fact, we became smarter. In a weird way, this genocide matured us politically. We know who the president is. We know that the president with one phone call could stop all of this, at least stop the funding. And instead, he did the opposite. Vetoed ceasefire resolutions 4 times. At the end of October last year, he said he didn't believe the death numbers coming out of Gaza, said we were lying about dying. All this constant dehumanization coming from a believable voice. Who is Joe Biden? The liberal grandfather. Everybody believes him. You know, if this stuff was coming from Donald Trump, nobody would have believed him. So it's not that we believe in Donald Trump's policies or anything like that. And by the way, it wasn't a wholesale abandonment of the Democratic Party. If you look at the Democratic numbers in Dearborn, every Democrat won except Kamala Harris.
You've pointed that out, that the results from the election at the local and state levels show that Arab Americans are still very much in support of Democrats. And I realize you were elected to the Dearborn School Board this election. Talk about the most significant differences you see between Democratic candidates then at the national level versus the local level.
Well, as Arab Americans, we're probably as concerned with foreign policy as any other community. I don't want to say the most, but no one's more concerned with foreign policy than we are. And the way our system works is the president basically has carte blanche in foreign policy, Constitutional Law 101, if anyone wants to come to one of my classes at University of Detroit Mercy School of Law. But they...
Is that an open invitation for all of us?
People pay thousands of dollars for the advice that I'm giving you right now. Okay, just so you know, I mean, this knowledge is... But I'm just kidding. So are we allowed to tell jokes on NPR? We're allowed to tell... Okay.
Once in a while. We've got 10 seconds each day to do that.
All right. So, but the president has basically carte blanche over foreign policy under our system. Okay. And so we know that. And that's a very important issue to us. People try to accuse us of being single issue voters or leaving the coalition, which is, we're the only ones that get accused of that. Everyone's a single issue voter. Like, there's some people who are part of the Democratic coalition because of its stance on environmental justice. If the Democratic Party all of a sudden became the climate change denying party, they'd leave. They'd stop voting for Democrats. And I wouldn't blame them for that. There's people who are with the Democratic Party solely because of its stance on Black Lives Matter. If they all of a sudden became the All Lives Matter party, a lot of people would leave. And that's okay. So it's all right to be a single issue voter, or at least a top issue voter. That's who we are. And we were watching our families dismembered on TV. And people are coming to us and saying, how dare you? No. And so we're no longer going to stand for this, because asking us to ignore that is another way of dehumanizing us. And we're not going to stand for that anymore. And so what happened in Dearborn, I mean, there were you just look at the numbers, and it's clear that there were thousands of people. By the way, Trump did 42% in Dearborn.
That's right.
East Dearborn, if you know anything about Dearborn, it's really separated by Southfield Freeway. East Dearborn is way more Arab than West Dearborn. In East Dearborn, he did better than 42%. And Harris did worse, okay? But Rashida did really well.
Yep.
So thousands of people went to the polls and voted for Trump and Rashida.
And Alyssa Slotkin, right.
Well, Alyssa Slotkin she didn't do as great as, but just look at Trump and Rashida. Thousands of people went to the polls and voted for Trump and Rashida. Rashida, who made national headlines in 2016 for getting kicked out of a Detroit Economic Club rally protesting Trump, who, when she became inaugurated, when I was there that day celebrating her, said she's going to impeach the okay? And now, 6 years later, thousands of Arab Americans are voting for both of them. How did that happen? Well, a genocide is how that happened. A Biden-Harris supported, cheerleaded, funded genocide is how that happened. We are not to blame here.
I want to switch gears. We only have a few minutes left here. And
am I doing like the angry Arab thing today? I'm trying not to do that. I'm really happy guy.
No such thing.
Come down to Dearborn, visit us. Come down to Dearborn, visit us. Have a coffee, have a hookah. But we don't have a lot of time today.
In addition to your activism, Amer, you mentioned you're a law professor. I know you're an author. You're also a comedian. Yeah. During times of great uncertainty, many of us turn to comedy to escape reality, or just to hear incisive social commentary that highlights the absurdity of it all. That's what comedy gives me as a member of the audience. Tell me in 30 seconds what comedy gives you as the performer.
Well, I've always said about comedy, or just life, sometimes we laugh so much that we cry. We've all seen that. But we've also seen people cry so much they laugh. So these emotions are connected to each other somehow. And comedy is about pointing out the ridiculousness of power. And comedy is a form of protest. It's always been a form of protest. That's why we say you punch up, And so, and Palestinians, we're pretty good at protesting. I mean, that's how I was raised. I learned how to say free, free Palestine before I learned the Pledge of Allegiance. So, I mean, that is who we are. And so it's a great way to tell our story. And when you can make someone laugh, they listen to you. And that's what I've learned from 20 years of doing comedy. So come to my next show.
Amer, you're speaking at a film screening on Friday. The film is called Where Olive Trees Weep. Just give me the time and location of that, please.
Yes. So come to Fortson High School at 5 p.m. in Dearborn on Friday, November 15th. It's at the corner of Ford Road and Schaefer Road. It's the oldest high school in Dearborn, one of the oldest high schools in Michigan. Please come see us. Come to that beautiful building and beautiful auditorium, 5 p.m. Friday, Where Olive Trees Weep.
Amer Zahr is a Palestinian-American author, comedian, activist, attorney, and a Dearborn School Board member. Amer, thank you for joining the Metro.
Thank you for having me.
Coming up, men are less likely to reach out for help when they're struggling with their mental health. That's especially true for Black men. We'll look at why that's the case and how it can change next.
Welcome back to the Metro on WDET, Detroit's NPR station. I'm Robin Vincent.
And I'm Tia Graham. The Omega Psi Phi fraternity is holding a community panel addressing Black men's mental health. It's okay not to be okay is a community conversation that's attempting to break the stigma that surrounds mental health issues. This conversation is coming off the heels of a discussion we had about Muslim American mental health stigmas with the Islamic Center of Detroit. It's Okay Not to Be Okay panel is a free event that's happening tonight at Third New Hope West Campus Church. That's in Detroit. It's happening at 7 p.m. And joining us in studio now to discuss it is Kevin R. Scott. Scott is a decorated combat-era Marine Corps veteran. He is a peer specialist at Detroit's John D. Dingle VA Medical Hospital, among so many other things that you are working on. You're also working on a doctorate degree as well. So, Kevin, welcome to the Metro.
Thank you so much for having me. What a pleasure and a humbled honor to be here. So excited about the conversation.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'm thinking about the panel, of course, and some of the things that you all are going to be able to dig into. What are unique challenges that men face, specifically Black men face, especially today?
Well, thank you. First of all, that is a tremendous question, but there's a myriad of issues. And if you would look at the panel that's going to be present, it is really addresses every intersect, if you would. From Raphael Washington to Dr. Carruthers to Dr. Kenneth Coleman, myself, Dr. Cecil Forbes, and of course Atu Polk. We're looking at individuals who are in law enforcement, Wayne County Sheriff, academia, psychology, and of course chiropractic care. I myself, a peer specialist at the Detroit VA. So when you look at this melting pot, this potpourri, if you would, it really addresses the layers that are stratified when we talk about Black men's mental health, because it's been so taboo. Men can, especially Black men, once we make ourselves vulnerable and reach out, now we have to deal with that unfortunate, ignominious stigmatization that society tells us that we're weak. And even culturally, it speaks to just some inadequacies, unfortunately, that misnomer of inadequacy.
Yeah. And, I think about the Divine Nine, Black sororities, Black fraternities, and the importance that they hold within Black spaces. And what role should Black fraternities and sororities play within mental health of its people in the culture? But in turn, do you think there should be more being done?
Wow. I don't know if people think that I paid you to ask me that question.
No.
But
Definitely not.
No.
I am... Our fraternity, the greatest fraternity on the planet, and I don't knock any of the D9 associates, but we are intentional. We have a platform called Brother, You're on My Mind. I serve as the 10th District Secretary, but then we also have a spinoff from that called Bloody But Unbowed, where we have a safe space. But to go strictly to your question, I believe that Black fraternity and sororities, we should be the champions. We should be the ones answering this clarion call. Because we have to provide that safe space that you indicated, to where there's a saying that I use that's, does this room have space enough for all of me? Yeah. We just can't bring bits and pieces of our trauma. We have to bring our entire trauma in order for us to heal holistically. So we have to be there. We have to be the ones at the table to provide that hope and courage for individuals who feel that they are alone, because I am a Persian Gulf War Marine combat era veteran. And it took years for the VA to finally say, hey, you know what? You might have PTSD and a TBI. But I knew, and those closest to me, especially my accountability partner, my darling, as I call her, my wife, she knows, and she'll watch me. I'll be having these conversations with myself, and she'll be like, who you talking to, darling? Yeah. And I'll tell a whole bunch of people. Yeah.
It's the truth. It's
the gospel truth.
Yeah. And I just think about that and the what it takes to be vulnerable like that, and remaining open and staying open in that space to be able to flesh out and really get through to the heart of all those emotions that you're feeling and the things that you're going through. So if you can talk about that space that needs to be created in terms of vulnerability for Black men, and how does the society provide that for them? How?
It's difficult. It really is difficult. Even though, and I guess for full transparency, here's the thing, and this is what I do. I do a lot of mentoring for individuals in my professional setting and in just my personal life. And a lot of times we want to have the individual helping us look like us.
Yeah.
Well, guess what? We may not have that luxury.
Yeah.
And so I tell people all the time that if you're in the middle of the ocean and you're drowning, do you care what color the person who has the life preserver in their hand looks like?
No.
Absolutely not. You need the help. So if we can have that person, if that person does look like us, great. But don't do yourself a disservice or injustice by not getting the help and the healing you need simply because that person doesn't look like you. Because I'm here to tell you, I just did a global mental health training through Harvard last week. Mental health is global.
Mm-hmm.
I'm talking about in every facet, in every climate, in every hamlet and bastion of the world. This thing is real.
And I'm once again thinking about just the context of mental health and specifically Black men and Black mental health. And listening to what you just said, we had a conversation earlier actually at the station about, looking at people and perceiving them for the way they look. And they look this way, so this must be the way that they think or the way that they are. And, it's really important if we can dig into that just a little bit, the importance of help, even when the help doesn't look like you, even when the help may come from a space that you're not comfortable with. How do you break into those places?
Well, first we have to be able to understand that with these invisible wounds, how they present themselves, exactly just like you said. How does it show up? We have to be intentional with understanding this. And I'm talking about, when we talk about Black male mental health, we're talking about from pre-K through adulthood. So instead of viewing Willie and Ray Ray as being bad kids, they can just have a problem with just their emotions. They can just have a situation where they don't know how to express or verbalize or articulate what frustration is with learning their timetables or long division. So now we've already labeled them. Now we want to fill them with medication. We want to set them aside, and now we're going to perpetuate continuously this school to prison pipeline. Because we don't understand that. And another thing that we must take into consideration when we have these curriculums is trauma-informed care, person-centered care. These individual children and grown men, teens, young adolescents, youth, they may need just a little bit more handling, a little bit more kid gloves in our approaches, and understand that we have to be intentional in the individuality of how we treat and care for our Black men and their mental health, because there are so many comorbidities that coincide with a deficiency and a neglect of our mental health.
My last question to you before I let you go, because of course we're talking about the It's Okay Not to Be Okay panel discussion that's happening tonight at 3rd New Hope West Campus on West Warren in Detroit at 7 p.m. We're chatting right now with Kevin R. Scott, one of the panelists on who's going to be speaking this evening. So before I let you go, Kevin, how much of the problem relates to Black men that we're talking about right now taking their own pain more seriously because their pain is dismissed by non-Black people? So when I think about Black men thinking about themselves, how much of that relates to the fact that non-Black people are not looking at them as in a way in a vulnerable way or in this a different way other than this strong Black man?
Well, to answer that, we have been so marginalized, and it's so ironic because Black men have been created this monolithic monster approach that we're scared, be afraid of Black men. So now you're scared of us, but now we're coming to you for help.
Yeah.
How does that even work?
Yeah.
I mean, how do you even balance that scale?
Yeah.
And I would be egregiously remiss if I didn't give my friend, brother Joe Wilson, who put this tremendous platform in place so we could have these difficult, uncomfortable, but necessary conversations. And I thank you all for creating this space to where I can come and hopefully speak to it in a very comprehensive, competent manner. Tonight is going to be great. I'm looking forward to it. Come on out and be with us.
I love that. Kevin, I want to say thank you so much for joining us on the show. Kevin R. Scott, a decorated combat-era Marine Corps veteran, a peer specialist at Detroit John D. Dingle VA Hospital, among so many other things that you have going on in your life right now. One of the panelists as well tonight at the It's Okay Not to Be Okay discussion panel. Excuse me. Tonight at 3rd New Hope West Campus on West Warren in Detroit at 7. Thank you so much once again for being here with us.
Thank you for having me. Take care. God bless you.
Coming up, we'll get all the details on a festive holiday event coming soon to Royal Oak. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Metro on WDET. I'm Robin Vincent.
And I'm Tia Graham. As the weather begins to change, so do the events offered throughout Metro Detroit. One of those events in Royal Oak is the Royal Oak Market Art Fair Edition. The fair will include live entertainment, food, and family-friendly activities, and you may see alcoholic beverage or two there as well. And because it's not just any art fair, there will be 60 jury-selected artists with work on display and for sale. Also, no worries about the weather. It's set to take place indoors. Joining us now to tell us more about the 9th Royal Oak Market Art Fair Edition is Allison L. Neal. Allison is the Senior Director of Marketing and Partnerships for the Guild of Artists and Artisans. Allison, thank you for joining us on the Metro.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Of course. So briefly, getting into it, the Royal Oak Market Art Fair Edition is in its 9th year. What is the recipe for a successful art fair?
Well, we have great quality work at all of our events. They're juried by other artists. So other artists who are in their practice. So ceramic artists are looking at ceramicists and evaluating their work. So you know it's quality work that you're looking at. And the great thing about an art fair is you get to talk to the artists and learn about their passions and how they made it and really connect with a piece before you purchase one.
I know it's a weird thing, but I love to kind of just like look at their hands and the way they move them, because that's their bread and butter is their hands and the way they use them. And I just find it so unique that their hands can do some of those things. But thinking about the art fair and just the art fairs in southeastern Michigan, why is it important to offer an art fair, especially like this one, right in the backyard in Royal Oak in the farmers market, basically?
Yeah, so we do 9 art fairs a year, but each of our fairs connect our artists with the buying audience, right? So these artists, many of them, this is their full-time job. They create art and sell it. And so we connect them with the people who are going to buy that art. And also they're free events. So it's a great arts and cultural way to get out, enjoy the arts, and like I said, learn about the art.
And the cool thing, too, like you said, there are 9 that you all put on. I know as I'm going through the year and I'm reading about the different art fairs, I'm like, oh, there they are again. Oh, there they are again with another one. One of them I know familiar with was the Belle Isle Art Fair this year, which was one that you all were also a part of, and Ann Arbor Art Fair as well. So once again, thinking about the fairs that you've all been able to bring throughout Metro Detroit, what are some of the most important things that you've all learned, especially about the arts community here in Metro Detroit?
The arts are just so pivotal to your life being balanced and a healthy well-being. So at our events, not only are there artists at them, visual artists, but we have music to enjoy. And as you mentioned, at this event specifically, it's an evening event, Thursday, Friday. We have adult beverages. So Dylan's small batch cocktails will be there with their gin canned cocktails, and they are delicious. Trust me, I am not a gin drinker, and I love them.
I'm a gin drinker, so that sounds right up my alley.
And we have some beer and wine, too. So you can really make a whole outing of this fair and come and enjoy the food, the drinks, and the art.
I love that so much. So it is happening, the Royal Oak Market Art Edition. It's happening November 21st and November 22nd at the Royal Oak Farmers Market. But the cool thing as well, not only is this happening next week, of course, but it's also happening as you're opening up the Royal Oak Ice Rink. So not only do you get a chance to go see beautiful art, explore, and talk to people like you, like-minded, you also get to ice skate and go through some holiday festivities.
Yes, that's right next door to the farmers market. So you can go out there, do some ice skating, see the tree lighting as well, and then come inside and warm up with us.
Nice. And before I let you go, in particular, this is the 9th year. So next year you're going to be celebrating a decade, 10 years of the Royal Oak Market Art Fair Edition. So what can we expect next year?
Well, we'll have 60 artists again with new work. They always bring new stuff and new exciting things. And we're already getting excited about the 10th year.
I was going to say, I know we haven't even made it through the 9th yet, but 10 years, a decade of just, beautiful art and work from artists who are actually being able to be paid artists and working artists, which is a huge deal. So I just want to say thank you to Allison L. Neal for joining us on the Metro. Allison is the Senior Director of Marketing and Partnerships for the Guild of Artists and Artisans. The Royal Oak Market Art Edition is November 21st and November 22nd at the Royal Oak Farmers Market. Really looking forward to it. Thank you, Allison, so much for being here today.
That's the Metro for Wednesday, November 13th. The show is produced by Sam Corey, David Lyons, and Jack Philbrandt. Our engineer is Nate Bender. Music by Sam Bobian and Will Sessions.
You can listen to recent episodes online at WDET.org and make sure to subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform. The show is also on YouTube if you like listening that way.
This is WDET-FM, Detroit Public Radio, your connection to news, music, and conversation. Thanks for listening.